My name is Tom Stevens. I work in the technical marketing group, and mainly I'm focused on a lot of things, but I primarily focus on vCloud Director. And me and my group, we're the guys who are responsible for generating all that collateral that you guys have probably consumed, like, for example, the HA best practices paper, the what's new docs, things like this, eval guides. That's all type of stuff that I write and put out. But mainly my job is really about education, and it's about getting you guys up to speed on various types of technology. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the things in vCloud Director, obviously. Now, I'm sure most of you guys work in IT departments, and you probably have some fairly large enterprise customers, I would imagine, in here, even the small guys. I'm sure you guys can appreciate how hard it is to put together a presentation like this when you have a room full of people. At VMware, we've gotten to a size where now we have huge amounts of policies in place just for what type of font you use and how big your words are and what pictures you can use. And, oh, this is, not corporate sponsored. So in my particular case, they looked at my presentation and they said, you have to go and add some slides. One of these is this whole slide about the disclaimer. So obviously anything I talk about, yada, yada, yada. I'm sure you've all heard it before. The other thing they told me, they were like, well, you have to have an agenda. And you have to have a slide that talks about your agenda. And so after some arguing and many meetings later, I came up with an agenda slide. This is it. Oh, here. So all I'm planning on doing today is talking about vCloud Director. That's it, right? And I don't have anything more to do. And we're going to give you just a brief overview of a lot of the new features that came out with the 5.1 release. And we're going to go through and try to go into a little bit more detail. I'm going to leave some room for questions at the end, and we'll see if we can't get those all answered. Again, we have probably about an hour and a half before the next session, so not to say that I'm going to hog the whole room for the whole time, but if you have any questions, feel free to stop me or just write them down, and when we go through the presentation, or after the presentation, feel free to ask. Now, before I begin, one more thing that I'd like to do is I'd actually like to say thank you to all of you guys. Seriously, the feedback that we get from our customers, and not only from the people who've already deployed vCloud Director, but those people who are thinking about deploying vCloud Director, those people that are using vSphere and need an easier method to have like a provisioning portal, these type of things, really you guys are what makes these products. And so I'd just like to say thank you to you guys because, again, if you haven't heard, on Monday we released 5.1, which in my own humble opinion is the best cloud solution on the market today. So, again, thank you guys. Go ahead and give yourself a round of applause. All right, so let's go ahead and get going. So, all these new features that we have in vCloud Director 5.1, I've broken into 3 different categories. These are based upon how our customers actually use, or we think that the customers will actually use some of the features. So these 3 pillars that I have are provisioning, network services, and management. Now, I know some of you guys are not necessarily clear on vCloud Director. I was talking to a gentleman earlier before the session started, and he said, well, we don't have vCloud Director. We're just kind of thinking about, how we could use it and why and, things like this. So what I wanted to do is take just a couple minutes and kind of give you an overview of what vCloud Director is and why you'd use it. All right? So back in 2009, IDC came out with they actually came out with a report later, but they, through their statistical analysis, realized about 2009, the actual deployment of virtual machines in an environment started overtaking the physical servers that you would deploy, right? And this happened for a variety of reasons, right? A lot of people were looking at doing server consolidation in the beginning, and so on and so forth. Well, again, now we've gotten to a point where virtual machines are deployed first and foremost, and the physical boxes are just, if you will, kit that's used to provide that CPU and that memory horsepower to run the virtual machines, really. This is a great news, especially if you work for VMware, right? But it's not without its problems, okay? So, first of which, an application typically doesn't stand by itself. If you deal with any type of enterprise level applications, for the most part, it's not just one virtual machine that you're deploying, right? Anybody can deploy a single virtual machine. You can script it, you can use vSphere, so on and so forth. This is pretty easy. But when you start looking at an enterprise application, you have many different virtual machines, typically all hosting a little bit of a component for the application stack in question. And these all need to be tied together in certain ways. Typically as a group, if one component is down within this, you may very well affect your end user's experience to be able to access and use the application in question. So all these applications, or all these components, tend to have a large amount of dependencies between them. Now, when I talk about dependencies, this could be communication between the various components within the application. It could be licensing restrictions, could be things like this. Now, for the most part, we've solved all these problems. With vSphere, for example, you can set up affinity rules. You have a concept of vApps. You can have start and stop orders for your VMs, right? And even if you didn't have these products, there's a dozen products, if you go down to like Moscone South, that you can go and see, and there's tons of people that have management products that will do similar things, right? Furthermore, you could even script it if you so desired. Right? The problem is even no matter how cool of a graphic user interface that you have for, say, your management platform, or how crafty of a scripter you are, you still have other dependencies when you deploy an application stack in your environment. Typically, these are all the infrastructure services that you're going to have to provide in order for that application to actually work. So for example, when you deploy an application, you typically have to go and deal with the firewall. You have to deal with the network. You have networking services like DHCP or VPN. All these type of things would require the assistance of typically other groups within your organization. So although it can only take you a couple seconds to actually deploy a VM, what tends to happen is you have to go to another group. You have to say, hey, I need a firewall. Depending on how nice you've been to that person over the last month or so, you could get it in an hour, you could get it in 3 days, 4 days. And all this does is basically extend the time that it's going to take for you to deploy, right? And in today's business world, what does time equal? What? Money, right. And, honestly, the more money that the company makes or company saves means probably the bigger bonus that you get and the better chance that you're going to get the G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip for Christmas, right? So, again, the whole thing is not just necessarily to be able to provision a single VM, but it's to provision that entire VM in the whole application stack with the infrastructure services that are required. And so this is really where we're going with vCloud Director. The concept of having a virtual data center that includes all of this that you can just hand off to an organization and then let that organization use vCloud Director as like a self-service portal. Okay? So when I talk about all these features today, you're going to notice that they're really designed to help you provide those infrastructure services, to provide you with that capability to have a very complex application that you can run and again, have a self-service portal for you. All right, so with that small introduction out of our way, let's go ahead and dive in. And again, out of these three pillars, I'm going to go ahead and start with the provisioning first. Now, on its basic level, provisioning of the resources basically entails the distribution of resources in your environment, okay, between your various organizations within your environment. Now, Again, this is a fairly simple thing, and vCloud Director already has this ability with providing organizations, what we call organizations, which are, if you will, separate entities that you can assign these various resources. And these resources come from one place. That's vSphere, right? So from your vSphere resources, that's where your raw compute and memory power is going to come from. You then pool those together in an abstracted layer and then reassign them or sub-allocate them out to your various organizations. So one of the things that we realized when in the previous releases is that people need different ways of dealing with things. And storage is really a key point here. In storage, not all storage is really the same. You have different capabilities that each storage subsystem in your environment may have. Now, you can grade these on a variety of different metrics. So, for example, you could say some storage it has a higher latency than others. Some is slower. Some costs more, right? For example, you could have NFS or SSD-based storage, so on and so forth, right? Well, you don't want your people to just consume all of this altogether. And in the past, what people would do is they actually had to create what we call virtual data centers for each tier of storage that they wanted to provide. So in vCloud Director 1.5 and earlier, you'd see a whole bunch of people that would have a whole bunch of these virtual data centers, and each virtual data center would supply a certain tier of storage. Kind of inefficient, right? And the ideal would be you just have one big pool and then you could allocate this out. Well, in the latest release, that's exactly what we did. For those of you guys who are familiar with vSphere 5.0, you'll realize that we had this feature called storage profiles. And now within vCloud Director 5.1, we've taken those storage profiles that you can create in vSphere and bubbled them up so that now you can use them within VCD to provide those multiple tiers of storage. So to get into a little bit of the details here, what you would do is you would go into your vSphere environment and you'd assign a series of capabilities. Right? Like, for example, again, those metrics that I was talking about, speed, latency, cost, could be location, whatever you want. You take those characteristics and you group them into a profile, right, that would be for your particular tier. So, for example, I could say, I want all the storage that is low latency, I want high cost, and fast speed. And that would be in my, say, gold profile. And of course, I'm going to assign those characteristics to my individual data stores, and that's how it understands. It basically tags those data stores with that type of information. So from a VCD standpoint, all we do is we consume that information that's already published or developed within vSphere. So from a VCD standpoint in the 5.1 release, you will manage, you will create, and you will delete the storage profiles all from within vSphere. Within VCD, you cannot do that. All it does is, again, pull vSphere, get the information, and then allows you to consume it. Fair enough? All right. Storage profiles are pretty neat. You can actually apply them to multiple things. Okay, so first and foremost, in VCD, we have this concept of a vApp, and a vApp contains one or more virtual machines and the associated networking for them. Okay, so from a vApp perspective, that's your application, that's your VMs, that's what you're actually using. So you can tell it when you deploy a vApp or create a vApp, you can tell it what storage profile you would like those particular VMs. And you can assign each VM to be on, say, a different storage profile. So for example, if I have a multi-tiered application stack, let's just use the common industry standard of a web tier, middle tier, and database. I could say my database is on gold storage, my web tier is on, say, bronze storage, and my middleware is on silver for all intents and purposes. I can set that up. I can also set up a default profile that will be used for an entire organization. So This default allows you, when a user goes in and creates a VApp, if they don't try to override the settings for whatever reason, it will go ahead and create it on a certain storage profile automatically. So this has a couple of cool benefits. Number one, the users don't have to worry about it, right? So it increases usability to some degree because they don't have to choose and worry about what data store to put it on. All they have to do is just say, ooh, I want it on silver, or I want it on gold, or whatever the case may be. So that's one. But two, it basically will allow you to prevent, unless, again, the customer overrides it, the ability to not have them suck up your best storage just by default, right? Because users will automatically, if given the choice, go, ooh, I want the best thing. But depending on your viewpoint, again, from if you're a provider or if you're just an internal IT department, you may not want them sucking up, say, all your high-valued SSD storage, right? Now, you can also apply storage profiles to what we call VApp templates, which are basically like a blueprint of a VApp that you can deploy in a catalog, and we could also apply them to media. So the media is pretty cool because, for example, the media would include all things like ISO images, things that you would want to make available, like, say, your boot images, these type of things. So you can specify a storage profile for that would be, say, on your lowest tier storage. It would be like on your NFS. So it's really cheap, it's efficient, you don't necessarily need high speed for it, and that's where you can just put all that stuff that's used not so often, right? You can also set what we call a default instantiation profile, okay? And all this means is that remember I mentioned that we have this templates that you can have. These are, again, are blueprints for this VApp. Once you have that, people that have access to it can go ahead and go through the catalog and say, ooh, I like this, let me go ahead and deploy it. When they deploy it, you can set it up so that by default, it will go ahead and deploy to a certain type of storage profile. So for example, let's say you had an ERP system and you've designed it specifically to work in a particular type of environment that has very fast storage. Well, you can save that as a template and let other people go ahead in your environment pull that down and deploy it as they want to. But when they deploy it, it will all deploy on, say, gold level storage. And again, they could change this, but as the application developer or the VApp developer, you can go ahead and specify this. All right, so this is one little step into what we call the Elastic Data Center. So by providing these storage profiles, again, you're able to allocate your different storage, but there's so much more that is involved when you're looking at a scalable type of solution. In this particular case, we've also added in, again, this concept of elastic VDCs. And elastic VDCs aren't new, really. They were actually introduced in the 1.5 timeframe for the pay-as-you-go allocation model, right? Now what we've done is we've increased the support and included the capability of using the quote-unquote elastic VDC feature with the allocation pool model as well. So both allocation pool and pay-as-you-go have this elastic VDC concept. And for you guys who may not be too familiar with it, the elastic VDC concept can basically boil down to one thing. It allows you to contain multiple clusters, or resource pools, within a single provider VDC. Okay? So, as you guys know, like if you have a cluster, you have a max of 32 hosts. Well, now you can have multiple clusters, assuming that you're using the right allocation model. This allows you to go from 32 to 64, so on and so forth. Okay? So again, we're looking at scale here. All right, so now I have the ability to include multiple clusters. And unfortunately, not everybody has clusters that are necessarily in the same IP space, right? In some cases, you might have an environment where you've set up multiple clusters managed by a single VC, but they all might be in different IP spaces, either due to how things have evolved within your data center. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to be able to have a layer of communication between all these different provider VDCs. Now this is an optional thing. I mean, this is really only if you have clusters that are on separate subnets or different IP ranges, but you can leverage this thing called VXLAN. VXLAN stands for Virtual Extensible Local Area Network. And this was a technology that we developed in conjunction with Cisco to basically provide a stretched layer 2 domain across a series of clusters, in our case. Of course, Cisco has their own reasons for implementing in different types of use cases, but in this particular case, we're using it to stretch across the boundaries of these various clusters. Now, VXLAN is something that in 5.1 is part of the product. So you can go through and if you have the appropriate licensing and all that, you can go from the VCD UI, and when you create a organization network, if this is all set up, it will automatically go through, create what we call virtual wires, and you can have up to, I want to say, 65 million of these, give or take. So what this gives you is a very large ability to extend the network capability from a self-provisioning standpoint within your organization. Again, this is kind of an optional thing. You don't necessarily have to use our VXLAN technology. Cisco has devices as well. For example, I'm sure other vendors are going to come out with things in the future. So again, it's not necessarily solely our technology. And again, it's only really a big benefit if, let's say, you have clusters that are on multiple IP ranges, right? Or different IP spaces. All right, so once you have this layer 2 and you have communication and all that, then again, you still have this problem of having multiple provider VDCs. And again, people did this for a variety of reasons, like, for example, the storage that I was talking about earlier. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to be able to merge these provider VDCs into one provider VDC. So one of the new features that we've added in to vCloud Director 5.1 is the ability to actually merge provider VDCs together. This capability basically will take 2 provider VDCs and create a union of all the resources and then provide you with just one provider VDC. And again, this goes hand in hand with what I was talking about earlier, that now I can have, depending on my allocation model, multiple clusters within a single provider VDC. Okay? Now, I have one single provider VDC, I have network communication between all of them. So now what this allows me to do is expand my organization VDC to consume resources that are basically pooled together by that provider VDC. And once I have this, right, I may very well have a case where I have different workloads in these various clusters. Okay, and of course, you know, I might want to balance this out for whatever reason. Well, we added in a migration ability. So you can actually take VM, and you can go into the UI, and you can say, migrate this VM from basically one cluster to another. And of course, this has some requirements. You need, you know, to be in the same organization. You need to have access to the storage, so on and so forth. But again, this would allow you to manually rebalance a workload between a variety of different clusters. Very cool stuff, in my opinion. All right. Another big thing that we've added in 5.1 is a whole bunch of changes into our networking stack. Now, in 1.5, we had a particular type of model of what we called organization networks. And these organization networks are what were used to provide communication within your vApp and from within a vApp to, say, an external network that you might have set up. Now, this is just a quick diagram, if you will, that would represent some of the networks that you would have in vCloud Director 1.5. In 5.1, however, we did away with organization networks. They're gone. Okay, so any of you guys who have organization networks, all those concepts, well, some of them apply, but they're all gone. In turn, we replaced it with what we call an OrganizationVDC network. Okay. The advantage to the OrganizationVDC network is A, we simplified it a little bit. B, we made it look a little bit more like an actual environment that you might set up from a networking perspective, so it's a little bit easier to understand. And C, we've included everything within the actual organization. right? So in 1.5, you could have some components that were outside of the organization, some that were inside of the organization, and from a management standpoint, this might have caused you a little bit of headache, right? So now they're all included within the organization as separate entities. All right, so one of the big key points here that provides you with these network functionality is what we call the edge gateway. For those of you guys who are familiar with vCloud Director 1.5 and earlier, you guys probably would think about this as the vShield Edge. Now, why do I call it something else? Well, basically, A, we rewrote it and we have something better, but B, we like to change the names every 6 months just to keep you guessing on what we're actually talking about. All right, so there are a ton of changes here to this edge gateway device, okay? First of all, in previous versions, it basically only had two interfaces. So you had an interface to an external network and you had an internal interface. That was it. In the 5.1 release, we've increased the number of interfaces that you could have up to 10. And sorry, I got to hold this thing, so that's really 10, I promise. Right? So these 10 interfaces can be linked however you want to. So for example, I could have connections through these interfaces to multiple external networks. I can connect these other interfaces from the internal standpoint to multiple OrganizationVDC networks. This also has a ripple effect through a lot of the different features and functionality that we provide, right? So now, like for example, in VPN, you would actually specify the public IP that you would use because in theory, you could connect that edge device to multiple external interfaces and you might have multiple external facing IPs, right? And again, you'll see this throughout a lot of the different features. Just the multiple interfaces alone give you a lot of different capability. Now, in addition, what we've done is we've added in some other factors. One, you can actually deploy the edge gateway now into two different methods. One is known as a compact, and one is known as the full model. There's no difference in the two functionally, right? So they both do exactly the same thing. They both behave exactly the same way. The only difference between the two is the fact that the full model consumes more resources. And it consumes more resources in order to provide faster performance, okay? So if you were looking at the two, depending on what your needs are, you could actually go for the full model, which consumes a little bit more resources, but has better performance, or you can go with the compact model that, say, is still pretty adequate, right, but consumes a lot less resources. So again, I was talking to a gentleman earlier, he was talking about dev type of environment where it's all kind of internal. They might not need, say, the full version. They could probably do with a compact version. But if you're using this in, say, a production environment, like you're a service provider, you may very well need the additional functionality, or not functionality, but the additional speed and performance that the full version will give you. Now, from a technical level, I'd just like to let you know, you can take a compact version and upgrade it to a full version. So if you create your networks, or your edge gateways, and you go ahead and throw one down, it'll give you the option, what do you want, a compact or full? Go ahead and select compact. If the speed and the performance aren't good enough, upgrade it. It's just a click of a button. That's all you have to do. Now, unfortunately, you can't downgrade from a full to a compact. Okay? So it's only a one-way type of upgrade. You either get the biggest and bestest and stay there, or you redeploy another one. That's pretty much what it boils down to. Okay? So that is a pretty cool feature. Another feature that we've added in is this capability of rate limiting. So I can actually sit there and define the bandwidth both coming inbound and outbound and restrict that according to whatever my needs are. All right, so from a private cloud environment, okay, you're all internal, maybe you don't want to set any limits. If I'm a provider though, I may very well charge my end customers based upon the bandwidth that I'm taking in and out. right? And I could provide that as a service to those customers, and of course I would charge appropriately for it. So it depends on your viewpoint of what you're looking at. But the ability to set the rate limits on the bandwidth is kind of a cool thing. Another thing that we've added in with this, we've added in the ability to do HA, okay? So in previous versions, you had a single, we called it a vShield edge device back then, and if it went down, what happened to your network connectivity? Anybody still awake? It went down too, right? So in the new version, in 5.1, what we've done is we've added in the capability of having a secondary, right? It's totally invisible to you, but what will happen is if one of those edge gateways goes down, the services will automatically get transferred over to the other one. Now, how do you enable this? When you go and create your edge gateway, literally all it is a little checkbox that's all you have to do. You check it, boom. And for those of you guys who are familiar with the technical details, what will end up happening is vShield Manager will go ahead and talk to vSphere and deploy a small OVF, which will actually be a small appliance which relates to that edge gateway. In the case of the HA, you'll actually see two of them now, one being the primary and one being the secondary. Okay? Let's see, what other things that we've added in for the edge gateway? Let's see, high availability. I think those are the main things that we've added in. Now, this also has a little bit of changes, like I mentioned, within the whole networking stack that we have, right? So remember I told you that now we have these OrganizationVDC networks. Well, this kind of simplifies your whole setup here. So what you can have is you can have 3 different networks, and you could do this in 1.5 as well. It's just called different thing, and you had to set up multiple edges and whatnot. But you basically have 3 different networks you can have. You have an isolated network, you have a routed network, and you have a direct connected network, right? So the direct connected obviously goes directly and connects into your external network. The routed network is basically behind or uses NAT to provide an IP space that will connect to your external network. Now your isolated network, this is kind of a cool one. An isolated network is totally isolated. There's no external connectivity, right? Which makes it really easy, like for example, if you're doing security testing or things like this, right? You want to make sure that whatever you're doing does not escape into the wild. So this isolated network is kind of cool. The problem with this before in the past is that you couldn't deploy a vShield Edge device on these isolated networks. And what else is the vShield Edge device actually doing just besides providing connectivity? Anybody know? So what? I'm sorry? It's providing all the networking services that you would consume, right? And in an isolated network, one of the things that it provides, or one of the services that it provides, is DHCP services. It actually acts as a DHCP server, okay? So what you can do now is you can actually deploy this edge gateway within an isolated network, or have it attached to an isolated network, solely for the purpose of providing those networking services that are needed to have an application up and running, okay? We've also added in some cool features, like for example, ability to further abstract your internal organization network, or OrganizationVDC network, from the external world. One of these features is what we call a DNS relay. So this edge gateway will act as a DNS relay. What this means is you'll have your DNS servers on your external network. Inside of your organization, you have these vApps, and these vApps have virtual machines, and they'll do DNS queries. Instead of pointing and configuring all those vApps, or VMs within the vApps, to point to your external DNS entities, you can now point them to the edge gateway. And when you point them to the edge gateway will then go and contact your external servers and then get whatever query is needed and then pass that along whenever a DNS request is requested. Now, the cool thing about this is this adds in another layer of abstraction, right? So if I copy a VApp, for example, from one cloud environment to another or from one organization to another, again, I don't have to worry if, say, the DNS IP has changed within the environment. I just have to start up the VApp. All the settings would still point to an edge gateway. I'm good to go. All right, so that's another feature that we've added in. All right, now let's talk about the services that this edge gateway provides. And again, what I was talking to you about for the last couple minutes have mainly just been about the actual infrastructure components, the edge gateway itself. But now let's talk about the services that it provides. And there's a lot of them, okay? The first new one that you'll probably notice is what we call a load balancer. Okay, now this load balancer provides load balancing capability for HTTP and HTTP-like traffic. In other words, both HTTP and HTTPS, so web-based traffic. Okay, it will allow you to take a series of servers that you can pool together, right? Like say a bunch of web servers that might be in a particular VApp. You create the pool, and then from there, you can create a virtual server, which will then act as your central entry point from the external network to access that pool of servers. Now, the load balancer has a variety of different algorithms. I think there's 3 or 4, if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head, that you can use, and you can select different types of things, like round robin, for example. You can also assign a weighted value to the individual servers in your pool to say, okay, go to this server first, this one second, or give a preference to an individual virtual machine that within your pool. This was actually a feature that was in a previous release, in the 1.5 release, but it didn't have any support within the UI. Now, you actually have that support in the UI. You'll actually be able to go through and configure these load balancers right from the UI. Kind of cool stuff. Other things. Again, the edge gateway provides a plethora of services. We have several different things. First is the DHCP. Again, I already mentioned that you have the ability to set up DHCP within an isolated network. Right? Of course, you could set it up on your routed network or your direct connected if it was really needed. But again, DHCP is there. Also, we have VPN connectivity. This is right out of the box. You can set up a VPN between organizations, so on, or different cloud environments if you want. Now, the changes within the VPN, it's not a whole lot. We have added in an enhanced ability to support a stronger encryption. I believe we support AES 256 now as far as the encryption method for the VPN. And other than that, VPN pretty much works like a VPN works in 1.5. It's kind of the same concept here. Likewise, the firewall, not a huge amount of changes within the firewall. It's still a 5-tuple firewall. You can filter based on source, destination, protocol, these type of things. Again, it's very familiar to how you were doing in 1.5. Now NAT, we changed NAT, okay, and pretty significantly. In 1.5, you had the ability to set up NAT rules, so you could define what type of services that you wanted to come in and what type of services you wanted to go out, meaning what type of traffic. It was very simplistic. Well, I won't say very simplistic, but it was simplistic enough that you could only define one rule, right? Now what we've done is we've added in the ability to have both source destination rule and destination rules. So you can actually set up rules specific to outgoing traffic or incoming traffic. This gives you a little bit finer grained control over the traffic that's going to be coming in and out of your VApp or to your applications. So you take all this combined, and again with some of the infrastructure changes that I've already mentioned before, and you'll notice that we've also added in enhancements across the board. So you'll see things like, for example, the ability to specify CIDR blocks instead of actual IP addresses. You'll be able to use non-contiguous address spaces when you're defining things like DHCP addresses and things like this. These are pretty much across the board. So you'll see this just, again, trickle down through all these different services. And all these different services provide you with the ability to, again, have that infrastructure component that is really costing you a lot of time when you're just trying to provision a single VM, right? So this, in conjunction with your memory, your CPU, raw power that you have, that's really that virtual data center concept. Okay, so let's talk about management. So our last little group here. First things that we added in is we added in support for metadata within the UI. Now, we do have metadata support within 1.5, but it's only available or only accessible through the API, which is fair enough for most people. But now in 5.1, we've actually bubbled the ability to see and define that metadata from the UI. So you as an administrator can go in and assign this. For those of you guys who aren't too familiar with the metadata concept, all this is like a key value pair. It can be anything that you want. Typically, it's a text field or a date field or something similar like this. And you can use it to tag various components within the vCloud Director infrastructure with whatever information you want. So, for example, I could tag a particular VApp and say this is for project X. I could assign a particular cost code to something. I could say this is my point of contact for a certain type of object. This metadata information can then be used by, say, an administrator to generate reports. Show me all the VApps that were created for project X, right? And that will help you define, again, better reports for your management or whatever have you. Now, there are some limitations to this, all right? Although you do have the ability to go in and set the data and actually view it and change it as needed, you don't have the ability to search on it yet through the UI. You do through the API, but just not through the UI, okay? So what does this mean? This means through the UI, I can't actually go in and do like a filter and say, show me all the VApps that are only applicable to project X, okay? I can't do that through the UI now. But, again, I can use the API and do that and get a list of all of them. Does that make sense? Okay. So, another cool thing that we've added in is the ability to do snapshots. Okay? I'm sure most of you guys in here are familiar with our snapshot technology. All it does is basically take a point-in-time capture of a particular VM and saves it off. You can revert to that particular point in time as you so desire. Now in the 5.1 release, again, we've added in this capability of doing snapshots, and you can do a snapshot of an individual VM or an entire VApp. And again, remember a VApp can include multiple VMs, okay? If you do it on an entire VApp, it will go through in parallel and take a snapshot of every single VM within that VApp at the same time. And it will save, or you have the option to basically quiesce the file system and save off the memory if you want. Okay? Obviously, if the VApp or the VM is powered down, do you really need to save the memory? Probably not, right? So these options are available to you. Now, regardless of if you only do one VM or you do the entire set of VMs that are included within your VApp, even if one of those VMs has a snapshot, it will be represented as that entire VApp having a snapshot. Okay? Another limitation, you can only have one snapshot per VM. Okay? So in other words, for those of you guys who are familiar with, say, Workstation, right? In Workstation, you have this cool hierarchical tree that you can have multiple snapshots and snapshots upon snapshots, these type of things. You don't have that yet with vCloud Director. You basically take one snapshot, you take another snapshot, it overwrites it. Okay? Fair enough? So no hierarchical tree with this. Sorry? vMotion with your snapshots? Sorry. Huh? Yeah, so you can't really do the vMotion with the entire vApp. The question was, is there vMotion support for the vApp? And no, you can't really do it on an entire vApp as it stands. However, there are some, like I was mentioning earlier, there are some changes. Like, for example, storage profiles. If I change a storage profile while the VM is running and whatnot, and I have the appropriate license in the setup, it will go ahead and move that VM and vMotion it to another type of storage, right? As far as just willy-nilly saying I want to vMotion an entire vApp, no, that's not there. Okay. All right, so snapshots are a pretty big thing. Again, I think in the future you're going to see us do a lot more improvements to this. Again, maybe multiple snapshots, I don't know. You'll also notice that I have a gentleman up here sitting up in the front row in this black shirt. Go ahead, Manish. So this particular gentleman happens to be the PM for vCloud Director, specifically for this release. So things like, for example, your question about the vMotion and whatnot, he is very keenly interested in hearing about all your feedback, as well as all of us, right? But he's the guy that's on the hook for it. So again, if you like the snapshot feature, if you want to have say multiple hierarchical trees and whatnot, or if you want things like vMotion, you may want to hold him hostage for a couple days. Just saying. You don't have to hurt him. I'm just saying maybe get his attention. So anyway, to continue, we've done a lot of cool things with the UI as well. So how many of you guys have vCloud Director installed in your environments now? Okay, that's a fair amount of you guys. Have you guys modified your CSS templates? I see a couple people going, yeah, no. So what you can do is you can actually, from an organization standpoint, you can modify the login page to customize it a little bit to your organization. Put up your own logos, put up your own graphics, these type of things, right? If you've done this, for you in particular that have these changes, you're gonna have to redo the changes, okay? What we did is we changed the color scheme to a nice, pretty blue. We internally call it Marge blue. But it's a nice soothing color that should ease any frustration that you might have at that current moment, right? But from a CSS standpoint, we've added in the ability to not only, of course, go to the new color scheme, but you also have some additional capabilities. Like, for example, in the past, you could do some very simple things, like change the color, you could change the banner, you could include like your company name, logo, this type of stuff. Well, in the 5.1 version, now you can do is you can put links on this page that would go to, say, a web server or a web page that you might have set up in your organization for pages like, I forgot my password. How do I actually go and request a new one, right, or reset it? Things like, how do I log on? What are the procedures for actually getting an account and using my account? These are things that they're small and they seem kind of insignificant, but if you've ever had to deal with a support desk and dealt with the bombardment of calls from people saying, I forgot my password, you know how useful this is, okay? Now, we've also added in throughout the entire product a huge amount of other usability features. For example, you'll notice on almost every single page, there's help now. So you'll see a little blue icon with a little question mark in it on almost every single item. And this will pull up help about that particular item in whatever context you might be in. We've also tried to display the information a little bit more effectively for how the end users would typically use it. One of my big pet peeves is whenever I had, say, vCloud Director 1.5, in order to renew my lease, I would have to go into my environment, right-click on the thing, select properties. Once the properties came up, I'd have to reset the lease, close out the window. A lot of steps just to do a simple task that I had to do every 7 days or every 10 days or whatever it was. So now we've actually included this within the UI. Right there on your home screen, you see your VApp or your depiction of the VApp. You just can reset the lease just by clicking on it. We've also included other things. For example, you have an easier method to search for your gold masters. And in certain situations, when you're trying to define or bring up a VApp, like for example, when you're adding a VApp from a catalog, in the past, it would just show you a whole list of all the VApps, just the name of the VApp. Well, this was kind of hard because a lot of people would go in and say, well, this is, I don't know, my VApp version 1, my app version 2, my app version 3, my app version 4. And from the end user, they didn't know, well, what the hell's the difference between 2 and 3 or 4, so on and so forth. So we've added in the capability, you actually will see the description for the VApp that will help you choose which particular template you're looking for, right? Just little things like this. We've also added in, for example, the ability to see how much space or how much quota you've already consumed or how much you have remaining, which is helpful because if you're deploying a VApp that has a whole bunch of VMs, it sucks when you try to deploy it and it gets halfway through and says, sorry, you don't have enough space. So now it will actually show you and say, hey, look, this is how much space you have. You may or may not be able to deploy whatever VApp you're looking at. Another thing that we've added in is single sign-on support. Now, single sign-on support from a cloud perspective comes into two different categories. In one category, you have, if you will, the cloud administrator who has access to the vSphere environment and vCloud Director. From this standpoint, we've added in the ability through the vCloud Director UI to go ahead and jump directly to pages within vSphere or Virtual Center through the next generation client or the web interface for vSphere. So again, this is all web-based, and basically what it's doing is just linking you directly into that particular component within the vSphere UI, which is kind of cool. So if you're in vCloud Director, you're looking at a cluster, you want to see the properties, or you want to adjust some settings, you can just right-click, say, open this up in the web client, boom. And with SSO, you won't even have to log on to the client. It will use your credentials that you've already used to log on to the vCloud Director interface, and then just transfer you directly in. Kind of a cool thing from an administrator standpoint. Also, from a non-administrator standpoint, we've added an ability to have SSO support, and this is support for the SAML 2.0 standard, and you can set up, for example, an IDP system, like, for example, OpenAM or some other type of system that would allow your users to authenticate to that and then seamlessly connect into your vCloud Director interfaces. Okay? Again, SSO, it's kind of cool. I will give you one word of advice. If you set up SSO, attention to detail is your friend, okay? If you guys have ever dealt with security or certificates or anything else, you'll know that so much as a space in the wrong place, a carriage return that's not required, that will screw up everything. Same thing here, okay? Just the steps are not very complicated per se, but there's a couple of them to get it up and running perfectly. And just take your time, attention to detail. That's all I would say. Okay? All right. So if you want more information, I know we literally, I'm running up against an hour now, I think. We just don't have time to go through all the cool features and go into detail in this particular session. But if you want more information, there's a couple places you can go. Number one, I think earlier this week I just published a What's New paper that you can get on VMware.com. This paper just kind of highlights some of the things that I've already talked about and goes into a little bit more detail. Another thing is you can follow the blogs on VMware.com. There's a lot of different blogs. And the reason why I'm not pointing you to any particular one is because there are different types of topics for each blog. And VCD depends on a lot of different things. So for example, VCD depends on vSphere, it depends on other components that you may want to look at. So I'd just say check out the blogs. Of course, there's other sessions available. I'll get to that here more in a bit. And Of course, I have a group discussion later, and this is a little bit more informal. You guys can come and talk to me about this. Now, before I go on too much further, let me ask, how many people in here are partners? Wow, a lot of you guys. All right, so something specifically for you guys. Okay, one of the cool new features that we've added into vCloud Director 5.1 is the ability to extend the API. Okay, what this means is you guys can write basically your own API callbacks and plug that in to our API. So if you have some cool new feature or functionality that you want to provide, you can go ahead and do that. Another thing, how many people out here are using platform as a service? Are looking at it? A couple people? You guys ever heard of a thing called BOSH? All right, so BOSH is an open source tool that allows you to in effect, provide a platform as a service offering. Now, it's not available right now, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you that we're actually having an open source plugin for this that we'll be making available in the near future. So this will plug into VCD, so it'll leverage VCD abstracts and BOSH to go ahead and let you set up a platform as a service. And again, if you haven't looked at BOSH and this is something that interests you, I highly would advise going and looking at it. I believe it's at GitHub, if I'm not mistaken. But you can go ahead and just do a Google search for BOSH, B-O-S-H, and you'll see it pretty quickly. Did you have a question? Oh, sorry, B-O-S-H. Oh, so again, there are other features. I would say that they're fairly minor in scope. In some cases, like for example, the BOSH, it's not quite ready yet, but we are going to be putting it out. So you'll see that I haven't really talked about it here, but when I mentioned the blogs and I mentioned going to VMware.com and looking for some of the white papers that we have, you'll start seeing some of this stuff put out, and more than likely, it'll be put out there. And I'll be honest with you, the reason why is because I can publish it and I don't have to spend 3 weeks with my web team trying to decide where to put it and how to do it and whatnot. I can just throw it on the blog. All right, so again, this is almost the last day. This is the day before the last day. The day before the big party, I believe, where Bon Jovi's playing. Yay. So if you're a Bon Jovi fan, I know you're probably pretty excited. But there's a whole bunch of sessions out here. If you weren't able to attend some of these, in my opinion, some of them are actually pretty good. You as a VMware attendee, VMworld attendee, you guys can go ahead and get the recordings of these particular events. There's a couple that I'd probably highlight for you, some dealing with the API, those specifically by William Lamb and Alan Renouf. I would highly recommend those. And there's also a couple that are basically user panels of, for example, people that have used Cloud Director for a variety of reasons. I find those interesting because what ends up happening is if you're going in and deploying something, typically someone's already got burnt or has experienced the same problems that you might have. So it's a good way to learn about it. All right, that's all I have. Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up to questions. If you have any questions, there's some microphones in the room. If you could step up to the mic, I'll be happy to stand here and answer whatever questions I can. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, given the scope of some of the changes you've described, what does the upgrade path look like between 5.0 and 5.1?
All right, so that's a really good question. In fact, I'm going to be writing a white paper on this, and hopefully I'll get it out before the actual bits are made available. We'll see. First off, you have the rip and replace model, right? That's option number one. Two, there's not a way to just do an upgrade. Depending on how complex your current configuration is, it may be easier than not. And Again, there's tons of different factors that are involved, like what type of networks you have installed, and the number of edge gateways, type of gateways, and what type of services. End result, I will say that doing an upgrade, it's not going to be a simple click on the button to upgrade type of thing. It will require some manual intervention, and in some cases, it may very well be easier for you to do the rip and replace. What I will say is look for the blog especially in the upcoming months, and I'll have a paper that will kind of detail a lot of that.
Okay, but for existing vApps, is there a migration path once you've upgraded, or what's the scenario there? I just went from LabMan to vCloud, and that was pretty unpleasant. So I'm not looking forward to something equally unpleasant going from 5.0 to 5.1.
The vApp should stay all the same. Again, it really depends on the infrastructure that you set up for the cloud environment. That's going to change. Like, again, the network changes and the support that we've added in. Again, it really kind of depends on your environment. But your vApps won't be affected, per se, right? I mean, they'll still be functional.
Right, okay.
But you may have to do, like, for example, change your networking. Or if you're going to take advantage of some of the new features like the DNS relay, things like this, again, that might require reconfig as well.
Well, we've set up a lot of VDCs for the storage tiering, which felt a little wonky at the time. This sounds a lot better with the profiles. But yeah, that sounds like a rip and replace exercise, correct?
And from what I'm kind of gathering about your environment, I would almost say the rip and replace would be the fastest way for you to get there, and probably the less headache. Again, it just really depends.
Yeah. Now, white paper's imminent?
So
your white paper on the upgrade?
Yeah, basically as soon as I get done with VMworld type of activities, that's pretty much the next thing that I'm working on.
Very good. Thank you.
No worries. If you want, by the way, you can take one of my cards if you want, and I'll send it to you. All right, sir.
Hi. Two short questions. First, is Red Hat still the only supported platform for running VCD?
I'm sorry.
Is Red Hat still the only supported platform for running VCD?
Yes and no. For a production environment, yes, we still support Red Hat. For non-production type of environments, we will have the VCD appliance as well, just like we did before. In the previous versions, it was actually based off of a CentOS build. In the current version for 5.1, it will actually be based off of a SUSE build.
Okay, and the other question, the load balancing feature, this is part of Edge Gateway, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, and does it have like a functionality to monitor the services it balances, or it does just simple load balancing?
No, it will actually have the ability to monitor. You could specify what port you want it to monitor, how you want it to monitor, what URL you want it to monitor. So for example, different ports. You could have it actually go through and do the load balancing on port 80, but then actually monitor on port 81, for example, right? So you don't affect the actual traffic based off of your monitoring. So yes, it has all that functionality.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay. Sir.
Yes, I think this is probably for the gentleman there in the front, for the PM. First one is, does the Edge use AES-NI offload, basically the Silicon supported AES. Okay.
I'm sorry, I barely.
The offload, basically the new chipsets support Silicon offload for AES-256. Is Gateways libraries compiled to take advantage of that? Basically, if you're doing high VPN traffic, there's massive benefits for doing Silicon offload on the encryption.
Can we take that offline?
Second one is, I've been asking for, 4 years now, is there any certification on these security devices? Like FIP certification, NSS. Without those, these devices are useless to us.
Sir, I'm sorry, I'm only picking up pieces of it. Maybe it's my poor hearing or the screaming that was done.
We need to discuss it offline.
Yeah.
There are some plans around it.
Okay.
We'd love to discuss it more.
Okay. Sir, I'll take you.
Do you support VAI snapshot offload for NFS in 5.1 and clone offload as well?
Do I support snapshots with NFS?
Snapshot offload for NFS VAI, the vStorage APIs.
So I talked to some NetApp guys. They actually are working on the solution now. They have it working. Do we actually support it? We haven't announced that type of support yet, but again, because it's a third-party vendor, it's really, dependent upon them as well coming out with their stuff. I will say this, they have it in their lab, it's working. I would suspect that you're probably going to see something very soon on that.
Second question is SRM support.
That's a tough question. Right now, the answer is no. It does not work with SRM. However, there are some sessions that you might have seen over the course of the week, specifically the one with Duncan Epping and Chris Colati for DR of the cloud. What we have is a PSO offering that they can use SRM in order to move basically a DR type of scenario from an entire cloud environment over. It's a little bit complex. It needs some work, if you will, and that's why we offer it as a PSO type of service. We are, of course, gearing up and trying to include SRM support, but it just didn't make it into this release.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Okay? Sir?
Just a quick question. Can the DNS relay in the Edge gateway and the DHCP support the physical network? Can we leverage that?
Can the DHCP support the physical network?
Yes.
Technically, it could. If you provided the connectivity, would you? I don't know. But again, we'd have to talk about your particular use case of why.
We're trying to get rid of Active Directory, and I'm just trying to look for a very simple solution, and we've still got,
It should work technically. I don't know anybody who's doing it, though.
Yeah, and the DNS relay, obviously you've got a single point. You don't have to reprogram all of your other systems, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, the DNS relay, that wouldn't necessarily be for your external network. That's really for your internal stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sir?
5.1 VCD appliance. Do you know when it's going to be available so we can have a play with it before building something big in the lab?
It will be available right when we GA the bits. So the same day that you actually are able to download the bits, you can go and download the appliance. Now, side note on this, you won't see the appliance as a download, okay, if they do the same thing that they did last year. What you have to do is you have to request an evaluation of vCloud Director, and that will take you to a page or go through a series of process. When you go through that, it will actually have the bits that you would download for vCloud Director, and then there's another little line item for, guess what, the appliance. And that's where you'd actually download it. So if you go and try to look on VMware.com, I'm just warning you, odds are you probably won't see the link. You actually have to go through the process of doing the evaluation. That will get you all the bits, right?
Yeah. And is there any indication on when GA is likely to be, roughly?
I don't know if we gave out an exact date, but I want to say it's next month. I can tell you this, everything, the code's RTM'd, it's all baked and everything else. I believe it's really just a matter of getting it all posted and pushed out.
Great, thanks.
No worries.
Is there a way to federate VCD cells management from one? Is there a way to federate the management of the VCD cells from one cell? If you have distributed cells across countries and you need to federate the management?
Not at this time.
All right. Do you think it's going to be a functionality that's going to be developed? I mean, it's something that could be.
So we're looking, obviously we take a look at a lot of things. Right now, and it's actually started a couple months ago, but we've started actual planning for our next big release. The problem is, if you've ever dealt with like a software development, we got tons of things we want to do. And so now what we're doing is we're actually going to the process of going, well, okay, what can we realistically achieve with the resources that we have in the time frame that we want, right? That process is ongoing right now, and it would be a little bit premature for me to say one way or another. All I can say is that it's on the table. Whether or not it makes it or not, I don't know.
Basically because it is not recommended to have, for instance, a cluster in a different country that you have the VCD cell.
I'm sorry, I heard it's not recommended
because, it was not recommended to have a resource cluster in a different location, geographic location of where you have the VCD management cell.
Right.
So it forces you to have a VCD cell on each geographic location that you have the
Right.
resource clusters. And that forces you, at least in our architecture, forces you to have like a management cluster for the VCD infrastructure that is required. So that's why I was looking for federating the VCD cells.
Yeah, like I said, it's something we're looking at. Just haven't got around to it.
Okay.
Things like the storage profiles and stuff, it just takes a little bit of time. But thank you. Question?
Sorry if I missed this, but fenced networking, is that still part of 5.1?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's just a standard component as
No
far as we're
changes
concerned.
at all, it's same as before?
No, it's, same thing as before. You basically just click the checkbox and boom, you're fenced.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Go ahead.
Is there any way to add like web filtering functionalities to vShield or something like that? Do you know?
To add in web filter?
Web filtering functionalities to
Well,
vShield?
by web, vShield already has the ability to do like firewalls. Are you looking at something other than that?
Additional functionalities beside firewalling, standard firewalling. I mean, web filtering, kind of stuff that the UTMs does. The UTM stuff does.
Right. So right now, no. However, if you have noticed, what we did is we actually did a couple of announcements and announced the change up of the whole vShield and suite, if you will, right? We now call it Cloud Networking and Security, or VCNS, as far as everyone's concerned. So you'll also notice accordingly there's an advanced version and there's a standard version of this. Right now there's a difference in functionality, like some have application discoveries and things like this for some of the other products that are in that suite. We're looking at incorporating new features for that. Again, it didn't happen in the 5.1 release, but what you'll see over the course of time, you'll see additional functionality being added in, and then it's just a question of whether it gets added into the advanced tier or the standard tier. So again, to answer your question, no, it's not available now. It's something we're looking at.
All right, thank you.
Yep. So, yes. Wait, are you the next speaker? Yeah, don't you have like an hour? Really? Oh, really? Huh? Oh, in 20 minutes. All right, so one last question.
For lab manager customers, like now there's a new version of vCloud Director. I was wondering, like there's three tiers. So which tier can we get it without any cost for migration?
All right, I'll be honest with you, man. I'm not a sales guy, so I stay away from all the licensing stuff. If you want, I can give you my card and I can point you to somebody who knows, but I'll be honest with you, I don't keep track of that.
Okay. For the vCloud Director, like installation, would you recommend like physical server or virtualize it? Like
Myself, as far as the question is would I virtualize the server? Myself, I almost always virtualize the vCloud Director interface, and the reason why is because I'm providing it in a cluster that provides HA and that other type of functionality. So that might be something that you'd probably want to look at.
But in that case, we have to build another cluster to avoid the chicken.
Exactly, you have a management cluster, right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, thank you.